Great. Well, let's get started, and let me welcome you all to the last breakout session of the summit. My name is Zama Neff. I direct the Children's Rights Division at Human Rights Watch, and I'm so happy that you all are here. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is technology that uses computers to form advanced functions, so not just following a simple command. This includes facial recognition, machine learning, robotics, computer vision, language programming. AI can be used in automated decision making, which is a decision made automatically, which can then be carried out by the machine, or it can be suggested to a human. AI can be exciting. It can curate your social media feed, suggest a Netflix movie for you to watch, or my all-time favorite, get you out of New York City without getting stuck on the Cross Bronx Expressway. But it is also playing a role in undermining human rights. So this is what we want to talk about today. What are the human rights harms of artificial intelligence, and what needs to be done to secure accountability from both government and industry actors on a technical, social, and legal front? So I want to start with Deborah Brown, who is our Deputy Director for the Technology Rights and Investigations Division at Human Rights Watch. Deborah, what are the concrete human rights abuses stemming from AI that Human Rights Watch has documented in our work?
Thank you, Zama, and thank you all for being with us on the third day of a long few days here. First, I want to start by acknowledging how broad the world of AI is. Often when I tell people I work on technology and human rights, the first question I get is, what are you doing on AI? And that's understandable. It's in the news almost every day. It has huge impacts on our economies, our education, future of work, kind of everything. But at the same time, the threat and potential of AI is often overstated. Some characterize it as posing an existential risk to society and humanity. So at Human Rights Watch, I wanted to walk you through how we approach AI and which issues to work on, because it can be so big and overwhelming. And I would say we'd start with looking at the human at the heart of it. Who's affected? How are they affected? Which human rights are most at risk? And how are the risks unevenly distributed within societies? Then we also look at the technical systems themselves. So trying to understand what data is being fed into AI systems. What are the outputs? What can we not know, and what does that mean for our rights? What risks does that pose, especially when it comes to AI accountability? And then we look at the broader environment in which AI systems are being deployed. I can think of one example where we investigate a human rights harm by an AI system, and the answer is tweaking the algorithm. Often the problems are much more deep-rooted and require understanding the legal, social, and economic environment in which these technologies are being deployed. So I'm going to walk you through a few areas of our work on AI. We've been working on, well, it's hard to say even when we've started working on AI because it's so integrated into all of our tech work. But for many years now, I'll start with, Peter, if you can go to the first slide. A report that we released just last Monday, which was many years in the making, which investigates the gig economy in the United States, looking at 7 different companies from food delivery to ride sharing and other delivery programs, apps like Uber, Lyft, Shipt, Amazon Flex, and a few others. And the report essentially found that workers of these platforms are being misclassified as independent contractors and are being robbed of their hard-won labor rights, that they're being paid below minimum wage because algorithms set their wages in a dynamic way for all but one of the companies we investigated. And as a result, once you calculate the costs that are associated with maintaining their vehicles, with gas, all the sort of costs involved in being an Uber driver, for example, you're earning less than the minimum wage as set by the state of Texas, where most of the research took place, and even federally. And some workers said, after accounting for all the costs, they didn't even have any take-home pay. Additionally, these companies don't pay into the Social Security system and Medicare, so they're stripping the public funds of critical resources. And at the end of the day, these these workers are being hired, fired, assigned gigs, and all this is done by an app. And one worker, an organizer we spoke to, said, it's like I'm being managed by a robot, and that the app becomes an extension of myself. And so this work has been some years in the making. Currently, we're not looking to focus our advocacy in the U.S. given the current environment in the immediate term, though that is a longer-term goal. But we're looking to the International Labor Organization, which next month is hosting a conference to decide on whether to move ahead with a binding instrument to protect the rights of workers in the gig economy. So that's one very recent area of our work. I'll go through a few more quickly because I know we have a lot to cover today. But kind of going back a few years now, in 2019, we launched a report actually led by our China team, Algorithms of Repression, which looked at the way that an app called the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, or IJOP, was being used to further repress the Uyghur minority, ethnic minority that faces repression in China, in Xinjiang, and that the data fed into that app, which was based on surveillance, was being used to identify problematic behavior, to investigate individuals, to send them to political re-education camps. So that's an example, as I was saying, of technology being used to further a political goal. The problem is not the technology itself, but it is amplifying and deepening some already really problematic human rights concerns. We also heard from Maria Reza on day one about how algorithms are amplifying all sorts of problematic content that basically touches on strong emotions like fear and rage and insecurities. But algorithms are also used to moderate content, to censor content, or to downrank it and to make it less visible. So we've been researching over the years the use of algorithms in this context and released a report in December 2023 looking at the use of basically how content about Palestine in support of Palestinian human rights was being censored in a systemic way on Meta's platforms. And we were able to determine that this was done in a systemic way because we looked at the underlying policies and the ways that they're being implemented. And one policy in particular prohibits the praise or support of organizations that Meta determines to be terrorist, which includes Hamas and other groups involved in October 7th. And we found that when people either mentioned Hamas in a post, that was enough, or even condemned Hamas in a post, that was enough for the algorithms to flag the content, because algorithms are notoriously bad at discerning context from content, and removed or downranked that content as being violative of Meta's platforms, their policies. And this is a case that came after our report, but came after the report on Meta's policies, but we produced a report on October 7th and the atrocities that happened that day. We posted on Instagram and Facebook a video about the report's findings, which said potentially there's crimes against humanity here. And in Arabic, that content was removed for supporting terrorism. And so it just shows how faulty these algorithms are. We always hear how AI is going to change the world, but we have to see if the AI actually holds up to the test and can do the things it says it's going to do. I know we're running short on time. Can I show just a brief video from another area of our work? And just to say that we look at kind of the wide-ranging human rights harms from AI, not just civil and political rights, but also economic and social rights. And this is a video about our work in the UK looking at the universal credit system there.
Wow, that's really powerful, and it really strikes me how we've both been using this research to look at the wild fluctuations in people's benefits connected with our deep work on hunger in the UK that really makes it personal, the effects of this technology. Bianca, I want to turn to you. And Bianca Wylie, we are so grateful to have you join us today. Bianca is a specialist in both technology and in public engagement. She's a partner at Digital Public, where she leads the work on public interest technology advocacy, but she also founded the Open Data Institute Toronto and co-founded Civic Tech Toronto. Bianca, can you tell us about the strategies that you are using to push back on the harmful uses of AI?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Zama. Thank you, Deborah. This is fantastic and great context for what's happening right now. One of the strategies that I use in pushing back against AI is quite conservative. I speaking to a room of people who work with human rights and know there's a foundation here. We're not starting from scratch. So one of the things that I point to and ask is, what's different with AI? Is the harm different? Is the consequence different? Or is it just the tool? Is the tooling different? And does the tooling being different warrant that we forget everything from before? No. And so I think one of the specific things we have to look at with AI, with any automation, is the slippage in terms of accountability. As everyone here knows, access to your rights is the part that we really want to get to, access to everyone's rights, which is just made harder when systems and decisions are harder to understand how they were made. And so I'm just going to step us back a little bit for some context, because what I hope with humility, and I think approaching AI with humility is very important, because I think some of the counter to something that's happening at that scale is to attack it in a very specific and localized way, which may be counterintuitive, but that's where we know where you have proper nouns, people in charge, specific harms. You need these things. You need geographies. You need to land things on the ground. So when AI has been used or has proposed for use, a really important thing to do is to map it in specific. What product are you talking about? Who sells it? Who's buying it? Who's the procurement officer? If that's one, a lot of AI is private infrastructure. The bulk of it is. We're not contending with a lot of public infrastructure here. So you're getting into commercial questions, you're getting into where is it being used, who's deploying it specifically where, for what purpose. That's a helpful thing to do. So that's one approach before you get into it. But I do want to offer one more thing, just as a way of thinking, because when I ask what's different, what's the same, AI, automation, technology, just made a quick remark, like people have been killing people with spreadsheets for a long time, right? So is the tooling the thing, or is the consequence the thing? And we're in a moment where the rule of law, at least in the United States, for example, there's a proposed moratorium for 10 years on AI regulation, which if you stop and say, okay, law and policy do some important things, and also we've been regulating technology for the better part of 30 years, I would say it's been important to do, and there have been a lot of gaps. The majority of regulation around technology really focuses on privacy and data protection, which are critical. It does not ask you, should we be doing this? Is this use harmful? It's never been supposed to, that's not what law is supposed to do. So I really like to look at the period directly before the internet went mainstream. And there's a lot of writing in that point in time that talks about the fact that we have become a techno-rationalist society, that the only way we make decisions is with rational thought. There's a Canadian author named John Ralston Saul. He wrote a book called Voltaire's Bastards, and it talks about the fact that in his read, the Enlightenment got some people out of the dogma of religion, and now we're completely back to the dogma of rationalism. And that was before the internet. So in my opinion, I think the thesis is right, that we are in a heavily techno-solutionist, rationalist, that gets us to the spreadsheet way of making decisions. I consider AI and automation an accelerant, but it's an older problem. So if we think about it that way, I think some of the antidote to that is to go really local, is to be very specific where you pick fights and how you fight them. A lot of the time, the technology is a distraction. I was a product manager in a portion of my career. I worked in tech support. I worked at a startup. It got bought by a multinational. Point being, it was helpful because I see how quickly people are happy to hand their authority over to systems, how scared people are of looking stupid. Politicians don't want to go against the idea of technology. And this is the real thing we have to acknowledge in the moment, the governments and the industry are on the same team because the governments want the industry to thrive. So no one's going to throttle that industry because it's what they think is the next way for their economy to grow. So I think we have to look at all of that as the real setting when we're engaging with these issues and bring it down to the local and think about how you engage on a case-by-case basis with some humility. Because there's no strategy that scales. And I will truly end on this note, which is scale has introduced a real problem because venture capital-backed technologies do not have to make money, they just have to spread fast. Okay? So they've spread, and they spread fast, and that's what success looks like, with none of the usual rubric or metric of how you would regulate or stop something like that. It's not there. This isn't typical capitalist expansion. And if you add that to the fact that so much of our technology is developed in the military, where you don't have to have a business model, and then it gets dumped out into civilian use. So I'll stop there because these are all really important informing components of what we're dealing with here with AI and automation and technology. And they really, really encourage us to there's no universal solution here, and the human rights as a foundation is much more helpful than any abstract scaffolding, complication, power loves complication, new complicated ways to think about these things when we actually need to return to some of the foundations that I think everyone in this room is very well acquainted with. And I hope that gives you some confidence, because a lot of the time it's not, a lot of is quite nonsensical, and that's because that's how it sells.
Thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate your really pointing out sort of the dual responsibility of both governments and industry. And I want to bring in a specific example from our children's rights work that I think really show that that action by both are possible. We did research in the last year that showed that Australian and Brazilian children's personal photos and data, so photos that they had put on the internet that they weren't using for a wide audience, that maybe a few people saw, or a blog, things that were kept private. Those photos were secretly being used to build artificial intelligence systems that in turn were used to create malicious deepfakes of children. So let me give you an example of one such photo that we found. There was a 2-year-old girl. Her lips were parted wide in wonder. She was touching the tiny fingers of her newborn sister. The caption and the information embedded in the photo revealed not only the children's names, but also the name and precise location of the hospital where the baby was born 9 years ago on a winter afternoon. These were photos that the family never expected to be seen beyond a few people. After we exposed both the scraping and the use of that information to train AI systems, both Australia and Brazil changed their laws. And I will say we don't always know if our work creates change. Usually people who make those changes don't call us up and tell us. But in this case, our researcher was testifying before the Australian Parliament, was actually suggesting draft language for Brazilian legislation. We know our work made a difference. So late last year, Australia passed the Children's Online Privacy Code. It was the country's first data protection law for children. And also last year, Brazil banned X and Meta from using its Brazilian children's personal data to train the company's AI systems. We also got the organization that had actually done the scraping of children's photos to remove children's photos from their database. And this was really important because this was the first time that any AI organization had removed people's personal data from a data set, let alone that of children. And it shows governments and industry that it's technically possible and that governments can actually regulate this. So I really love your pointing out this area of, we have these sort of dual areas of responsibility. I wonder if you all can share with us where we've seen gains, but also where the biggest challenges are that you see. We'll start with you, Deborah.
Thanks, Zama. And I think, you started us off with a really powerful impact, and I think it shows where there is opportunity and possibility. I think where there's a challenge is, and I say this with all support for children's personal data and children's rights, it's often once we turn 18 that those rights are signed away because that's a less compelling use case for governments and companies. If they actually protected everyone's personal data and rights, their business models are undermined. So these are important wins for children, and we need to use them to push the door further open and to go after the larger business models that these companies rely on. In terms of gains, I would say they're always kind of gains with footnotes. So there was the EU AI Act that was passed, and it is now in force, and some really important protections for human rights and to not use AI and facial recognition in many high-risk contexts. The problem is that the carve-out is for national security, and that's always the carve-out, and who defines that and how that's overseen is always a big question in terms of the impact of these gains. I think even with good laws on the books, we're seeing them being challenged already. Recently, Hungary passed a law that would allow facial recognition to be used in public gatherings, including pride protests or pride events, parades, which analysis shows completely at odds with the EU AI Act, yet it's still going forward, so that will have to be challenged. So I think maybe the message is we use regulation as much as we can, understanding that it's one tool of many and needs will always kind of have shortcomings, and there needs to be pushing to even implement what's actually on the books. I'd say you'd need to pair regulation with companies taking more principled stands. I don't think they'll do that on their own, but companies, like governments, aren't monoliths. There are people inside who are themselves organizing, saying we won't build this tech, especially in the context of military, who stand up and say we didn't join the company X or company Y, not literally X, but figuratively X or Y, to build tools for militaries to, press a button and target someone based on the algorithms we're building. And we refuse to do that. So I think it's about pushing at all angles and seeing where you can find allies and try to find, the issues that can be wedge issues to open up the floodgates to have bigger reforms, but also understanding that regulation always has its limits.
I really love that point, and I think Bianca also said this, we are asking who are the people behind this who are responsible. Bianca, what about from you, gains and challenges?
Well, an interesting case that I worked on in Canada was ArriveCan, which was in the federal government put a mandatory app in use for airports. This is pandemic related, but they had been trying to modernize border processes prior to the pandemic starting. So they took that opportunity and went for it. And so it was an interesting one because I was and continue to not be okay with mandatory technologies. And the only other place we have had a mandatory technology is Canada Post. And the commonality between these two is the border and the economy. How do we have efficiency and convenience related to goods and people moving through borders? So this was funny on one side because the unlikely bedfellows, and we need to acknowledge this, when I was fighting ArriveCan, the only people fighting it with me mostly was on the far right. And they had a very different set of reasons why they thought it was a bad idea, and some of them bordering on conspiratorial or, chipping, whatever else. But I was like, ooh. And the problem with this was that if it was convenient for most people to go through the airport and they felt that the app was fine and they trusted it, no one was going to fight it. And that's dangerous because efficiency and convenience will never be illegal, ever. So that is not a regulatory problem. That is a cultural problem. And that was bad for me to see, because I think sometimes when a political group stands up and is opposing something, the moderate, the centrist, the left might be like, I don't want to touch that one, because then I'm going to be associated with Pepe the Frog. I don't know if that meme means anything to you, but I was tweeting things and then realizing, like, oh boy, okay, here we are. So interesting and worth noting, I would say, is that if some of the staunchest opposition to automation and mandatory technologies is on the far right, that's something that we're going to have to think about, because I experienced that, and I think that's politically salient. But that convenience and efficiency one is the downside, and as I mentioned, it will never be illegal. And what is dangerous is that most of us will take the conficiency, there's a new one, portmanteau. It's going to help me be more efficient in speaking. That's where the bulk of automation resides, is in the non-regulated spheres. And so it normalizes in places where it's just kind of becomes a bit more of a compliance exercise. The reason this is important is because when we think about regulatory approaches, when they're very specific, and this work with children's rights is so vital, when they're very specific and it helps you hone in and succeed. The flip of this is what's happening with AI. A lot of it is, if you read some of the proposed legislation or what's going on in the EU, you categorize maybe 5 to 6, 7% of it as high risk, and it gets attention, it gets focus. What that does is it inherently normalizes the 93% of it that is not deemed high risk. But how we categorize risk gets back to sort of techno-rationalist thinking. I mean, if you're using AI to refuse my application for an apartment, like there's lots of things that like it might not sound high risk, but it's definitely causing a lot of pain and a lot of economic violence. So we have to be careful, because to my mind, AI as a regulatory approach, and this is a good kind of like, you not expecting everyone to agree with me here, I'm not even sure if it makes sense to regulate it as an object, because a lot of it is math. We don't regulate statistics. We don't regulate databases in any generic way. And in some ways, it pushes us into this sort of abstraction where there's complexity and the scaffolding and more complication, when we don't have a great access to justice regime in most countries that I've been exposed to. So is it helpful to scaffold more of this on top? Like, I would argue probably not. And I'd also say, to close with another piece of Canadian history, we regulated data approximately the year 2000. And that was turning a whole set of relations and politics into an object. And the reason we regulated data was to harmonize trade. That was the sole reason it was done. Human rights got bumped to a secondary. It was not done to protect human rights. We had Senate hearings about this. You can go back. It's a fascinating history. The number one reason it was regulated was to enable global trade, so the data could move in a harmonized way through borders. That is precisely what we're replicating with AI. So the reason it is being regulated is for trade, primarily. Everything else is secondary, and we need to have open eyes about that when we consider what it's going to do and what it is not going to do. So that's the downside, is I think people get excited. Oh, it's regulated. Yeah, it's regulated. And, like there's a lot that's missing even when something is deemed regulated, and I think we need to sometimes just shove all the newness aside and ask about the base. What's the harm? Who's the proponent of harm? What would the remedy be? What does that look like? And what we never did in Canada, it was we never inventoried all our pre-existing regulations to figure out how to extend them into the case of AI. We have a massive base of regulatory work done here. No one did that homework. They just skipped to let's regulate AI. Okay, you're kind of diminishing a lot of sectoral expertise and a lot of legal history. So these are the downsides of like where this is going, to my mind. But the upsides is there's definitely people's awareness growing, and there's pushback. But
yeah. So let me ask you all one last question before we open it up. What's next, and what's the world that we want to see? If we're back here for Summit 2035. What are you working on now, and what do you hope to change in the next few years?
Just a light question to end. I mean, I think we're at a moment where there are paradigm shifts happening, or I hope we are. Like picking up on the point Bianca was making about efficiency. Maybe efficiency still is seen as a good thing in many parts of the world, but I think it's starting to become a dirty word in the United States because of DOGE and the Department of Government Efficiency. And I'm hearing really smart people thinking of, okay, well, efficiency, what are we trying to be efficient for? Without efficiency, you need to, like, in order to earn trust and keep communities safe, we need to actually add friction. And so what are we trying to do, efficiency, or have governments that deliver and for everybody? And so I think, this was a conversation I had with a staffer on Capitol Hill whose office is trying to update the Privacy Act, and they're looking at how do we frame this in a way that doesn't embrace the language of DOGE and actually delivers on privacy and government, fill in the blank, that serves the people's needs. And so I think if trying to look, I don't know if we'll achieve this by 2030 and what the world will look like, but we also do use technology in our work. Human Rights Watch also has a digital investigations lab, which is using technology in a principled and rights-respecting way to advance human rights. We use communications, all sorts of technologies. We're not Luddites, so I don't think being a Luddite is a bad thing. But I think if we look ahead, if we're able to really tap into how we can use technology to advance rights, push back against the inevitability of AI being proposed in every aspect of our lives, and really have serious conversations about how do we deploy it in a rights-respecting way, redefine efficiency or what the purpose is, and move forward from there. I don't think it's going to be easy. It's hard work, and I think to the point of scale, I think we actually do need to scale up our ability to work on these issues because companies have scaled beyond compare. But I think, and sorry, the last point is that we start seeing leadership in all corners of the world, not just expect the tech companies to be able to run off with the powerful governments and set the regulations or self-regulation on their own.
I like this question because I think about it every day. I'm never sure if I'm doing the right thing morning to morning. So right now, procurement is a major focus area for me because in work I've done to date, even if I couldn't stop something, a bad deal from being tendered, I helped the terms be made better for the public side of a public-private negotiation. I think one thing we need to look at and remind people is that their authority is being encroached upon by digital infrastructures. Their authority, like people that you say, you're running a healthcare company. Are you trying to move your autonomy or your agency into your digital infrastructure system that's managed by a large corporation? Like, I don't think you're trying to do that most of the time. If you have efficiency, great, but you're going to end up with the problem in terms of your own agency and authority, in terms of defining how your products and services work eventually. Tech companies are smart. They ride that line carefully. They know, and they do a lot of great work in service of the mandates of organizations and firms. So this isn't a simple binary. But I think there's room to play in the negotiation space of contracting, because I really think what I've seen to date is incredibly horrific deals that have been done on the public side, where it's just because everyone just wants to do the quick thing, the fast thing. The politicians want a quick win. They want the app. They want the new thing. They want the new platform. And so the vendor is sort of given a lot of room to lead. And I think that's a space with a lot of opportunity. On the what kind of a world do we want to live in? I think that, to go back to the convenience efficiency problem, technology is, I think, impacting our relationships. And there's no version of democracy that is efficient. It's awful. Democracy is terrible. I used to run public meetings. It's hell. Like, it's not a system that you would say, you want to sign up and do more of this every week? Like, it's not. And if you run a meeting of a room this size, if you can get everybody walking out saying, oh my God, I guess I can live with that, that's what success looks like. So that is the kind of thinking to bring into things like negotiations. Like, it's not win-lose. It's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of this piece of thinking that we have to bring to the technology debate and discourse. And it's not, do we adopt it, do we not? It's under what conditions, under what terms. That's the question of democracy. Under what conditions can we live together? You have to live with people that you despise, or they despise, or you despise the values, or you don't. I'm not going to speak to all of your independent cultures, but it's not easy. And so I really think we have to move to the how. We have to focus on the how and focus on a slowed down cadence, relationships, contracting, implementation, maintenance of things, cutting better deals. Because the binaries are very difficult to navigate. To fight something to get it removed, though, once it's in use, a technology, is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to pull digital infrastructure out of people's operations. So that's a good stick to wield, is, okay, you want to do this? Let's make sure we do this properly, because this probably won't go away. And we need to set the terms of maintenance, not just purchase. So that's the kind of thinking for all the contexts in which you work. This is how I'm thinking about it.
I love that point, and I think it's something that our child rights and technology researcher has reminded me is that I guess we can't say that AI is young, but the status quo is not the future. That we have the opportunity to influence how this is going to be developed. And when it comes to children, we want to make sure that children's rights are not violated in the making of AI. That it's built in a safe, rights-respecting way. And for example, that AI is not trained on children's personal photos. I'll just mention that coming up next, we are looking specifically at reports. We've had reports all over the world about the creation of sexually explicit deep fakes and children. And we're looking at that now specifically in South Korea, which is, we think, sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to technology and use of technology, that often what we see in South Korea is going to be used elsewhere in a year or two. But there's that connection between the same AI systems that were then being trained on children's personal photos are also being used to make sexually explicit deep fakes. And so we're using this information in order to, in the future, to really push that every country has strong child data protection laws to prevent the misuse and exploitation of children's personal data in their own countries. And that the maybe small successes, but real successes in Australia and Brazil so far show that this is possible. We don't have to give in to just what the companies want. Let's open it up to questions and answers, and I'm sure you have lots of questions on this topic. And I think we have someone with a microphone who will come around. And maybe just introduce yourself and where you're from.
I'm Ros Horan from Australia. This is a question for Bianca. I was interested in, what you said about the kind of developing way of thinking of rationalism and techno-rationalism even before the internet, and about that book, Voltaire's Bastard, I think it was. My question, it's a bit of a lateral question, but is AI capable of giving us another kind of thinking that isn't rationalism? Is it capable of having something of creative, intuitive thinking? Will it ever evolve in that way?
The short answer to me is no, because it's trained fully. In some ways, AI is trapping us in the past because it's trained on everything from before. So it's almost like, because it's not actually, there's no cognition. It's parroting patterns of words, and it's being predictive text. There is a great book by a guy named James Bridle, and I cannot remember the title of it. But I think you would enjoy it, because there are ways to understand, like, is the pattern matching itself at that scale able to identify things that we could then potentially run with differently? Yes. I think that is a yes, but there's so much that we have to remember. Think of drug, drug approval process. It's a case where there's a lot of enthusiasm for the use of AI. And even if you can identify, say, 100 new potential drugs or 100 new patterns of, maybe we understand the disease, you can't accelerate the human trials. You can't accelerate, oh no, oh no, we don't understand how this was identified, and then how do we troubleshoot, so to speak. So I think we always have to remember that although AI is being presented like it's this big, it's always only this big in a chain of things that are this big. And those things aren't accelerating. So I think there's potential, but it's a lot smaller than the way it's being put forth, and that we do have to be careful we're not just repeating. That's, to me, the big danger with AI, is that if there's anything we need right now, it's anti-patterns. We don't want more of what we did before faster. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
One of the things that I worry about with AI is not so much that it will be taking over the world, but it will pollute the world beyond usefulness. Mm-hmm. So as particularly with large language models, they create content. People post that content. That content then gets sucked up in training data, and so it becomes very self-referential. Mm-hmm. So much further away from creativity, actually towards an unusable average, actually. Mm-hmm. So are we worrying about the wrong things in some sense, that this is ultimately going to kill itself?
Do you have something you want to say? I would just say, I've been reading about, as I mentioned, this sort of like before the internet era. And because some people will say that AI is fascist. And I think that word is getting whipped around, like pretty much you can say everything's fascist. I don't have enough of the grounding in it. But the reason I understand what the aesthetic is so persistent and homogenous, which is a hark back to whether it's Nazi Germany, Soviet era, like art has to look like this one way. And it was that under liberal democracy, there was plural ideas, pluralist idea of what an aesthetic was. So I think it's interesting because I think that the homogeneity it does rhyme with populism and fascism in a way that is quite dangerous. And that's another good example of like an aesthetic will not be illegal, but it has a consequence. And I'm always more drawn right now to culture and to business than law and policy because of how law and policy are often so mired in the industry. So I love the observation. I'm thinking about this a lot too, and I'm glad, it's not an either or, it's an and. But that's what that thought provokes for me.
No, and just to add, I think this is one area where, like, if you look at the link between this narrative that AI is all-encompassing, that it's the future, and that only the companies know what's needed. Leave these geniuses to their own devices; they'll figure it out. They need all the compute power. They need the ability to, build these data centers that completely obliterate in a healthy environment, and don't interfere because you can't possibly understand it. So they've been given all the resources, whether it's financial or the freedom to build data centers, exploit the environment, without being even forced to show what the results are. Like, if they're forced to be able to say, here's, the human rights due diligence that we're doing, here's the benefit, and here's how we're using the resources responsibly, then I think they'd probably make different decisions. They would be more specific and say, okay, here's the goal, we're trying to build this is our priority. And instead, they're just kind of going wild and seeing what happens. And I think that's where regulation can play a role in forcing companies to be able to show and putting the burden of proof on them to say, we're developing this technology for this purpose, here's the environmental cost, here's the human rights risk, and here's what we're going to do about it. And instead, it feels like a free-for-all. And that's something that links to our other areas of work, whether it's in the environmental rights division or corporate accountability. These are the kinds of conversations and difficult issues we're thinking through.
Yeah, and another book recommendation, Wendell Berry wrote, it's a long essay, Life is a Miracle, and it's called Against Modern Superstition, and it talks exactly about that there is no, it's just a free-for-all, and once it's a free-for-all in science, what are we doing? And so this is, again, it predates, but yeah, exactly that. It's a great short book.
Hi, I'm Natasha Schill from the Zurich Committee. Thank you very much, very interesting. One question I had is on education, because I mean we are quite illiterate and naive, and the pace is so fast. You know, how do you have ideas of how we can, you know, increase the literacy of all of us, all generations on this? Because what I hear often from young people posting, you know, photos on Instagram, etc., is like, I'm not an important person, so who cares? I can do these things, but it's immensely naive, right, and dangerous.
I mean, maybe Zama's best place to speak about education, but we need education at all ages in life. I mean, I think there is a lot we can do in terms of educating ourselves, but I also kind of challenge the question, because I think the onus shouldn't be on individuals to, you know, figure out how to not post irresponsibly. Like, companies should not be able to use videos that are posted privately or even to a select group of friends to train data for other purposes. Like, that just shouldn't be an issue. So yes, we can learn how to be more secure and safe and educate ourselves, but I also think there needs to be hard guardrails, and it should just not be acceptable to reuse data posted for one reason for another. And just because, I mean, either there's no regulations or because companies skirt regulations, as is the case with Clearview AI, which took like everyone's faces to train a facial recognition app. Like, these things just shouldn't be happening. And so we can take all the precautions, and we should, and maybe there's more we can do as a community in terms of education. I do push back in kind of where the responsibility lies.
Yeah, I'm really struck by, for example, you have challenged the words that we use. Intelligence. Does that give too much power to technology versus who are the humans behind it? I think we heard yesterday about the word hallucination rather than lies or inaccuracy. So thinking about how the words that we use affect our ability to be active and to feel like we can change and challenge versus accept.
Yeah, it's common said that AI is a marketing term. Like, that's a very common saying. And and I just want to echo the idea of educate. Like, I don't think we should have to learn about AI. Like, I think about this because people want to do democratic engagement on AI, and I'm just thinking, how many literacies do we need? We need a data literacy. We need this literacy. And I think just to confirm, like, I think the world needs more human rights education. You know, like, I think that's where there's power. I worry about us, like, keep following onto the thin ice of the framing of the industry, but it needs to be done. But I think there's probably more in the human rights frame.
Thank you. This has been so informative and enlightening, and I work on women's rights, and so it seems at times that with technology, women can never win, because it's and that it shows also in this space how there is not a simple answer with technology, because on one hand, what Zama was talking about, the deepfakes in South Korea, that it impacts children and particularly probably girls, and it impacts tremendously women around the world. So sexual violence online has escalated. It's terrible. AI, of course, as you said, because it kind of like keeps us in the past, and the past is so deeply unequal, it's sort of like it slows down progress on equality. At the same time, Sweden, for example, today just passed a prohibition on online adult content to, sort of like stop sex work online. And that is very problematic for autonomy of women and for a lot of women who, depending on a lot of people, but particularly women who work on the sex work industry, for example. And so it seems that we can never win, and the risks of, regulating one way that will really shrink autonomy, that will be really impactful for particularly marginalized community of women, for example. And so that is sort of like something I struggle, and I'd love to hear your opinions about it. And then the other thing is about prompting, the industry of prompting. What is it that, if you can explain a little bit about what prompting as an industry is in terms of training people to make the right questions to AI, and whether there is a human rights angle that we should be looking at in terms of prompting as an industry, and whether we should have a sort of like an idea of what prompting would look like from a human rights perspective.
Let's take that, and then we'll take two more questions. So if there's something you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think just an anecdote. When when generative AI became like very accessible, and there was a lot of concern in last 2024, there were, it's called the year of elections. I think more than half the world's population was going to the polls. And we were monitoring, how synthetic media being used in electoral contexts. And sure, that's an issue. And there were some contexts where, it was used to amplify hate speech and, with misleading content, things like this. But the real harms are actually, firstly, gendered, because it was women politicians. And frankly, the harm caused by synthetic media is much more often sexualized synthetic media about women, not really about politics. And so I think it shows both how deeply ingrained, if we're saying we're looking, the technology is trained on existing data and existing kind of the body of content in the world. A lot of that's misogynist. A lot of that is gendered, so it either excludes women or is hateful towards them. So the outputs will reflect that. So that's one thing. And then where are we putting our attention in terms of solving for risks? Elections are incredibly important, but so are protecting women's rights. And so we saw this huge energy towards combating electoral disinformation when we know who's impacted the most. So I think it's about like where we focus, and also what's kind of, I wouldn't say coded into the technology, but again, like technology is a reflection of society. This isn't a tech problem. Often, okay, we could have a law that's addressing synthetic media targeting women, or we could just have more robust and resource programs to combat gender-based violence and make sure that those are either flexible enough or updated so they're applicable in the current technological climate. I don't really have, do you want to take the prompt question?
Yeah, I think the prompt, just so everyone is on the same page with this one, the idea of an industry of people saying how you should best write queries into large language models. So prompt engineer, I think, is a job title they're trying to make happen. I would put this all under the category of trying to make something happen. Like there's always these cottage industries that then surface, and all the AI experts and and it's sort of like, I think it will pass, and I wouldn't, it's not the kind of thing I think that will have staying power. I would also guess, if I had to be more Machiavellian brain here, is that that's another way of harvesting information from people, which is to try to figure out which patterns that you tell people to put in and what gets uptake. That is absolutely off the side of my brain. Like that might be not what's happening, but there's always these sort of different things at play depending on who's trying to make something happen in the tech industry. I just also want to echo what Deborah said about, I think my answer is a bit full of grief to say that I don't think we have techno-solutionist. This is why I'm a little bit off the track of the law and policy world, because I just think we've let so much harm run rampant. You look at the culture right now, and I feel like the far right is trying to claim anything that's not science. There's a really good book out right now, it's not new, from Dugald Hine, and it's called Out of the Ruins. He was a climate activist for a decade, and he basically says, stop yelling science at people, it's not working. You can't yell science at people. This is not working. So I also don't think you can yell equality, like anything I'm saying here, this method isn't working, and the far right is rising, and it's taking, in my opinion, this is where there's a fight. It's trying to take history and pastoral and romantic and values and all the soft stuff is accruing to the right now. And I think that's extremely dangerous, because that's where I think we have room to play. We've run out the clock on the rationalism, so I don't think there's a technical solution. I think this is just accelerating, and we have to actually stop thinking we can rein it in with more rationalism. I think we have to go to a soft place that none of us, I would say, are particularly comfortable.
So let's take two more questions here. I think there was one on the end, and also Marty.
This is following on Rose's initial question and your answer. Marty Krasny from Northern California. And I'm saying this with a lot of confusion, but I heard a talk by Benjamin Bratton from UC San Diego recently, who, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially says, take off the guardrails. AI is the next evolutionary stage, and human beings have created all of the challenges that Human Rights Watch has been created to respond to. So if human beings try to regulate, these are the human beings that have brought us trafficking, predation, environmental crisis. Maybe we just let go. And AI, and when you said it only can deal with the past, so could Gandhi only deal with the past, so could Havel only deal with the past, so could Mozart.
Yeah.
And they created things. And maybe this mechanism is really where we're headed. And we should just let go.
Let me just make sure we get this question, the question that's on the other side of the room.
I love this question. I'm not answering, I'm just saying I love the question.
Hi, I'm Miranda from the London Committee. It's a little bit adjacent. I wanted to ask you, I know the session's about regulating harms, but what would be your own personal best outcomes? Let's say, what can AI produce for humanity if we channel it in the right way and regulate the harms in the right way? What would be your ideal, your best outcomes, the best potential? What would it produce for humanity?
Great. So I think we'll use those two questions to give you each one final word.
Can I pick up on the last question? It's exciting to dream. I feel like we're so often just trying to plug all the problems, but I think it's not an AI answer, I'm afraid. It's that the people who have the right solutions, people with, that we have people in power and that people are empowered to advocate for human rights, to fight inequality, to support, the environment, and that we're able to use AI and develop AI for those goals, and that it's a tool that's part of a broader political system that needs urgent reform. And I'm afraid right now things are opposite, where it's empowering the forces that are perpetrating those harms. But I think the other way to see it is it's a technology. It's something that can be used for different purposes. Yes, we need to get to the business models, and whether it's the environmental aspect, the pillaging of personal data, we can't just ignore those, but that we can use tools that are actually rights respecting and are centering the values that we want to see in society. So it's a dual track. We can't do one without the other.
I think I can do a 1-2 punch here, which is say if Benjamin was here with the proposition we should just let AI go, I'd say that's fairly nihilistic. And I worry a lot about cynicism, but I think nihilism becomes even harder to contend with. People made AI. It did not fall from the sky. And I think there are extremely clear politics of the people and their intention behind this machinery. It is for profit. It is to reduce autonomy with workers. It is a lot of things. Its application, this brings me back to the 97, 93, 90% of use, is to accelerate capitalism. So I'm not okay with letting AI just go, because I don't think our problems, say it even discovers this, discovers that, is the capital market going to support justice? No. So I'm not there, but I love the prompt, and I think to answer the second question about good case is I believe in each other. I believe in us. I believe in our ability that if I have a product or a service and I am given a contextual, specific case and it's useful and it makes my work better, yeah, I trust you to use it and I trust me to use it. But that's not the way we're doing uptake. We're delegating authority, which I find wild, because right now I feel like we're not comfortable with our own authority. And I'm going to end with my favorite example of late. I got my driver's license late in my life. I'm quite a benevolent driver, is how I feel. I'm never in a rush. I'm always, yeah, sure, I feel like it's good. And I made a little bit of I would say, I don't think it was aggressive, but I entered a right-hand, near a school, an intersection, trying to make a right-hand turn on a red light. The crossing guard blew his whistle so hard at me, and he was like, you. And I was like, oh my God. And I was sitting back, and I was like, oh my God, did I really just do that? That's the scale at which we need to hold each other accountable. We have regulated the automobile industry beyond any number of, I can't tell you how regulated it is, all of the pieces, and we still have 900 crossing guards in Toronto, because that's how much we still die and get injured at that scale. So you can't scale past an intersection, because how we follow our laws is what we need to help each other with, how we use our embodied authority, how we hold each other accountable. Someone does something kind of dodgy that you work with, you need to haul them up. Because what's happening, I'll end with this point, what's happening, for example, in Palestine and Gaza is happening because there's humanitarian violence happening in Toronto. This is a cultural problem. I really believe we have to address it locally, and violence has to be something that we don't accept in our day-to-day interactions, no matter the scale. So I think it does come back to us and our culture and our comfort with hauling each other up and not thinking that all the violence and the bad resides in something over there or somebody over there, you know? So.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end on that note, and it certainly gives me hope that at Summit 2030, Summit 2035, we will see an environment where we have a more rights-respecting framework for artificial intelligence, and that, if it's not too much to say, that we can help bend the arc of history in a human rights direction. And so I really want to thank Deborah, thank Bianca, thank all of you for coming.